Hi guys, it's time for chapter 3, Destiny Calls. It looks like Chester the cat is attacking that beet that they found in the last chapter. Just a quick recap. Chester thinks that Bunnicula is a vampire bunny rabbit and that he's turning vegetables into vampires. So, let's see what happens. Moments later, Chester reappeared from behind the house carrying a small box in his mouth. He trotted toward us and deposited the box at our feet. Howie poked at it with his nose. "What's this?" he asked. "Well, as you undoubtedly know," Chester explained, "in order to destroy a vampire you have to drive a stake through its heart." I groaned. "Not again." "Don't you remember the last time you tried that?" Chester immediately began bathing his tail, which is a cat's way of covering his humiliation. "What happened?" asked Howie. "Well," I said, "it seems Chester decided to drive a stake through Bunnicula's heart." "Oh no!" Howie cried. "How could he?" "That's a good question. With the kind of stake Chester selected for the job, it was a little difficult. You see, he thought—" All right, Chester spat out. "I made a little mistake. Everybody's entitled to one mistake in the course of a lifetime. But don't worry, Harold, I know what type of stake to use now, and I've got just the thing." I glanced at the box laying in the grass. "Toothpicks?" I asked. "What better way to spear vegetables through the heart?" "Toothpicks?" I asked again. Chester glared at me. "Yes, toothpicks," he snapped. What's wrong with toothpicks?" "Oh, nothing," I replied with a shrug. "If you want to make little white party hors d'oeuvres out of Bunnicula's victims." "We're not making little white party anythings," he shot back. "We're destroying killer vegetables." "You tell 'em, Pop," Howie put in. I gave him a look. "Sorry, Uncle Harold," he said. "And we're going to find Bunnicula, bring him back home where he belongs, and save the people of this town from his evil ways." Okay, I said. I agreed to go along, not because I was convinced that the townspeople were really in danger, but because I was worried about poor Bunnicula, out there all alone in the world. If anyone needed saving, it was he. "Can I carry the toothpicks, Pop?" Howie asked. "Sure, kid," Chester said agreeably. "But first—" He selected a toothpick from the box, and with a sudden lunge that made both Howie and me jump, neatly speared the white beet laying at our feet. We gazed for a moment at Chester's handiwork. "Whew! I bet that hurt," Howie said, shaking his head. "Looks like an hors d'oeuvre to me," I commented. "Well, now that the critics have been heard from," Chester said, "perhaps we can move on." He lifted his head, and with an air of great importance began to swagger down the street. "Howie," he called back over his shoulder, "the toothpicks?" "Right, Pop," Howie replied, picking up the box with his teeth. I fell into step behind them, and off we went. We walked for blocks. Cautiously we peered into every driveway, every front porch, every open garage door that we passed. Nowhere did we see anything out of the ordinary. Indeed, all over town people seemed to be going about their lives as usual. When at length I suggested to Chester that we do the same, he drew up short and looked me straight in the eye. "Nonsense!" he exclaimed. "This is not a day for the ordinary, Harold. We can't turn back now. Destiny calls." "Harold!" a far-off voice called out suddenly. I jumped and looked in amazement at Chester. "Did you hear that?" I gasped. Chester nodded. "Chester!" the voice cried. Chester's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he looked wildly about him. Could it be?" I asked. Is Destiny really calling?" I don't know," Chester stammered. "Harold! Chester!" the voice called again. This time it seemed nearer. I could feel my knees start to quiver. Howie ran over and took refuge between my legs. He looked out sheepishly. It was then that I turned and saw the familiar figure jogging up the sidewalk. "Chester," I said with a sigh of relief, "look who's coming." "Oh no," he groaned in recognition. "Hello, Max," I said to the approaching bulldog. I noticed that he was wearing the same white turtleneck sweater I had last seen him in. Chester and I had met Max at Chateau Bow Wow, the kennel where we were boarded when the Monroes went on vacation. "Hello, chaps," he said jovially. "I've been calling you and calling you. How've you been? Out for a little exercise?" "Something like that," I said. "Want to jog?" he asked. No thanks. Do you live around here?" Just moved in a while ago, he replied. My family used to live on the other side of town. That's our house over there. He nodded over his shoulder. How do you like it? Well, it's bully, except for... He mumbled something that sounded like next door and pawed the ground. Well, Max, it's been great chewing the fat with you, Chester said abruptly, but we're on an important mission. No time to waste. Oh, really, Chester? And what, may I ask, are you up to? We're in search of white vegetables. Seen any? Max gave Chester a puzzled look and then shrugged. Well, I don't know what you want with them, but yes, I've seen some, as a matter of fact. Darndest thing. Got up this morning, went out to go dig up a bone I buried in the garden last night, and what do you think I saw? Howie dropped his box of toothpicks. The early bird getting the worm? He asked. Chuckled Max. Clever little whippersnapper, isn't he? No, young fella. What I saw was... White vegetables! Chester finished the sentence for him. Right on the money there, Chester. There must have been, 3 or 4 at least, lying about the garden. Are they still there? Chester asked. Max turned down the corners of his already turned down mouth. Guess so, he said. I don't know where they'd have gone to. Right, said Chester. Let's go. That house over there, you say? That's right, Max replied. You want to join us? I asked. No thanks, Harold, old boy. Max replied. I've got enough adventures for one day, if it's all the same to you. It was then that I noticed that Max's face was covered with scratches. What happened to you? I asked. At first he didn't answer. Then, gazing off into the distance, he said softly, Snowball. Huh? Snowball, he repeated, and then almost in a daze he wandered off down the street, muttering to himself under his breath. That was strange, I thought, as I trotted along to catch up with Howie and Chester. But then Max always was a little peculiar. I wonder what he meant by Snowball. I rounded the corner of the big yellow house Max had indicated was his to find Chester and Howie making stabs at what looked like a large white rutabaga. Their toothpicks kept breaking. Boy, this one's tough, Howie said. I noticed 2 other white objects lying nearby with toothpicks already sticking out of them. With a great deal of effort, Chester finally succeeded in getting the rutabaga to accept its tooth-pickled fate. Whew! Chester said, wiping his brow. He looked around him at the rest of the garden. Doesn't look as if there are any more to take care of here. Howie scanned the garden as well. No more here, he echoed. Then he attacked a hose lying nearby. Growling, he wrestled with it, ignoring the fact that the sprinkler at the other end was bouncing and splashing all over the garden. Try not to leave teeth marks, I advised. Come on, Howie, knock it off, Chester said. We've got to keep moving. You can play later. He started off in the direction of the street when he came to a sudden halt. What if? He said, shaking his head. No, he couldn't have. Not in one night. Still. What are you talking about? I asked. Howie let out a yelp as water spurted into his eye. He began barking furiously at the leaking hose. Nice work, I observed. You've not only left teeth marks, you've expanded the sprinkler system. May I suggest we get out of here fast? Wait a minute, said Chester. Howie ran up to Chester's side, no doubt seeking his protection from the attacking garden hose. I just had a thought. What if Beniculas met up with one of his own kind? You know how they multiply, Harold. Well, I don't really, I replied, but if they're like everybody else these days, they probably use those little pocket calculators. I would, except my paws are too big. I hit all the numbers at once, so I have to do it the old way, and I never could get the hang of it. Let's see, 4 times 6 is 18, or is it 32, or... Chester bopped me on the nose with his paw. Ouch! Not that kind of multiplying, you twit! Oh, I'm talking about reproduction. I was aghast. Shh, I said, not in front of the child. Oh, it's all right, Uncle Harold, said Howie, who'd overheard the whole conversation. I know all about that stuff, and Pop is right. Rabbits really do multiply like crazy. Right, Chester said. Let's just hope we're not too late. Come on. Wondering how it was that Howie knew so much more about reproduction than barbecues or garden hoses, I lumbered off behind Chester. I was so lost in thought that I didn't even hear him when he began yelling. It's him! I made out at last. It's Benicula! Harold, get over here! I ran to join Chester and Howie, who were huddled behind a bush. Chester was looking into the direction of the house next door. There, on a porch railing, perched a furry white animal. A shadow fell across it, so I couldn't completely make it out. But it did look an awful lot like our missing rabbit. Grab him, Chester commanded. You're the only one who can do it, Harold. Get him in your teeth and carry him home. Oh, Chester, I protested. You know how I hate getting hair on my mouth. Besides, he looks so peaceful lying there like that. Couldn't we just come back and get him later? 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 Chester fairly shrieked. Don't you understand anything, Harold? Later may be too late. Get him now. He pushed at my haunches, and I set off toward the porch. Get him, Uncle Harold, Howie cried. With a leap, I grabbed the sleeping rabbit in my mouth and took off down the street. That's it, Uncle Harold, I heard Howie call out behind me. Take the bunny and run. I'm sorry, Bunnicula, I thought. I really didn't want to do this. Hopefully you'll sleep through the whole thing. When we get you home, I'll tuck you in your little bed in your cage. Picture. Is that a rabbit that is in his mouth? What do you think? So this one is Harold. Can't see. There's the little Howie. Let's see. I'll tuck you in your little bed in your little cage and you'll be nice and cozy, and that's when I heard a woman scream, Help! Help! I looked over my shoulder. Howie and Chester were close behind. On the porch, where moments before the rabbit had been napping, stood a woman waving her arms in our direction. Help! Someone! Police! He's got my cat! My precious cat! My Snowball! Snowball? My mind reeled as I thought of Max's scratched up face. As best I could, I looked down at the object I was carrying in my mouth. Its eyes turned upward to meet mine. There was a gleam in them, a gleam that spelled trouble with a capital SNOWBALL. I gulped. Snowball hissed. The woman on the porch screamed, Help! You can say that again, lady, I thought, for both of us. And that is the end of chapter 3. So what happened in that chapter? They met a bulldog named Max, whose face was scratched up by something named Snowball, which we now know what that is. And Max had a bunch of vegetables that had been sucked dry by Bunnicula. And they, in theory, killed the vampire vegetables. And then they thought that they found Bunnicula, and they had Harold grab him, but as it turns out, it looks like it's a cat. Alright, think about what you noticed and wondered, and we will move on to chapter 4 in a little bit.